Okay, so welcome to week 1 of the L in MEL, and this week we are talking about reporting and visualization. As always, we'll be recording the session for today for those who cannot make it, and only recording the plenary, which is going to be the whole session for this time around. So the agenda for today, Leanne, and you'll see Jenny Riley is here as well. I'll get her to introduce herself in a moment, but both Jen and Leanne will go through a recap of this week's content that you would have seen, and I've seen a lot of you have already engaged with it on the discussion boards, which is great, on Yammer. I will then ask Leanne and Jen some questions in relation to examples and their own experience when it comes to reporting and visualization. And then we'll have a bit of an open Q&A for you to be able to ask any questions on the topic that you like. So as they're going through the presentation, I would really encourage you to write any questions that you might have in the chat, and I'll make sure that they're addressed at the end of the presentation. So as I mentioned, I have Jen Riley here, who is the Chief Digital and Data Officer at Clear Horizon. Jen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi everyone. Yep, I'm at Clear Horizon and head up our digital team, and we do lots of data visualizations for monitoring and evaluation projects. I'm a monitoring and evaluation expert myself, having spent 20 odd years in the sector, and probably the last 10 of it focused on measurement and evaluation. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of the examples of our work and how dashboards and visualization can help with the monitoring and evaluation process and outcomes.
Excellent. Thanks, Jen. Thanks for that. All right, I'm going to share my screen now for the presentation, and then we can get kick-started. Can everybody see that okay? Is it coming up? Have I frozen? No?
It's slow. Okay, here it is. Thanks, Keisha. As Keisha said, welcome to the first week of the L in MEL, that is learning. So today's focus is going to be a bit on, as Keisha said, what makes a good report, and then thinking about the visualization aspects of reporting, which is why we've got Jen in. Thanks, Keisha. We're going to start with some tips and traps for good reporting. This reflects the content that you would have been through this week outside of this session. There's 3 common traps that we like to refer to. The first one is, I provided the information, now you work it out. That's the sort of tagline we have for this one. This is a common problem we see in MEL reporting, and it's where a lot of descriptive data is provided, but there is no judgment. Okay, so at the start of the training, we learn about the difference between measurement data and then the whole purpose of evaluation, which is actually making a judgment of the merit or worth of a program. So providing a lot of information but not actually going so far as to make a judgment is a bit like writing a research report but not concluding it, not having a conclusion at the end. Okay, so you wouldn't get away with writing a research report that didn't come to a conclusion and have an actual concluding chapter or paragraph at least. The same with evaluation. There's no point providing information and then leaving it to the reader to try to work out whether the program has been good or not. So this is the first trap that we see: the provision of data, but no actual judgment, no actual explanation of whether based on that data, the program has done a good job or not. The second common trap is the one that we call it, well, I answered your questions. Isn't that good enough? And that's where there's a bunch of questions that have been provided.
Sorry, I think that might be Ali. If you could put yourself on mute, that would be really great.
Thanks, Keisha. This trap is where a lot of questions are answered, but they're disconnected from each other and they don't actually help to tell a story. So we have a question, then an answer, then a question, then an answer, then a question and an answer in the report. But at the end of reading all those answers, you're still not sure whether the program's done a great job or not. So again, it's about coming to a conclusion. The difference with research reports and evaluation reports is we actually come to the conclusion at the beginning of the report. We actually answer the big evaluation question, the key evaluation questions at the beginning, and then we provide all the evidence to support that answer. So that means answering the sub-questions, or at least bringing data to bear against the important measures that collectively help us understand the extent to which a program has done well. So it's not sufficient just to answer all the questions in lots of minor, what we'd say minor questions, and provide that information against the big questions. You actually have to answer the big questions as well. And the third common trap we see is that we call this one, the evaluator thinks, and therefore it is, which is where the evaluator makes a judgment, but it's unclear to the reader how that judgment was arrived at. Okay, it's to do with transparency. So evaluators use criteria to make judgments around how good or otherwise a program is. If you're not clear about the criteria that you're using, then it is one that's not transparent, and two, it's not clear how you came to that judgment. It's not sufficient that just because the evaluator has been commissioned to do a report or an evaluation, that they get to say whether they think the program is good or not without at least defining what good looks like. So this is a problem where we see a conclusion be made about a program, but without being at all clear about how that conclusion was arrived at. So this is where you need to get really clear about your performance expectations, and so that people understand the benchmark against which you are making a judgment or a conclusion around how good a program has been. Thanks, Keisha. So in conclusion, what does make a good report from this perspective? There's 6 points here. The first one is that we weave data together to answer the big questions that have been asked. And by that, we mean that we collect data from a range of different sources, and that those different threads of data, those multiple lines of information or evidence, are woven together to answer the question. This is the big difference between reports written in a research setting versus reports written in an evaluation setting. Research reports tend to provide the results by data source. So interview results, survey results in separate sections, and then come to a conclusion at the end. Evaluation, on the other hand, answers the key evaluation questions by bringing all the relevant data to bear against that question. So it's about bringing the interview data together, for example, and survey data together to answer the question. By that, and we mean by that weaving. We talked about the concept of data weaving a couple of weeks ago. So the first thing that makes a good report is that you weave the data together to answer the key evaluation questions. The second thing is that all findings, whether they're positive or negative, are substantiated with evidence. And I shouldn't just say whether they're positive or negative, I should say all findings, positive and negative. We should. It's a sign of a good evaluation report that the positive aspects of the program are reported, and so are the negative aspects of the program. When people are starting their evaluation journeys, they tend to just report the good stuff and are afraid to report stuff about what's not working so well. But this is where the real learning happens, and this is where you can make a real difference. Facing up to those learnings and really understanding what's not working well and adjusting your program as a result to have better impact is a really important part of good program management. So all findings, we should be looking at positive and negative findings, and they should be substantiated with evidence. So we shouldn't be making a judgment or saying something, making a comment or having a conclusion about a program without having the evidence to back that up. This is an example of that report mistake we talked about before, which was the evaluator thinks and therefore it is. It's not good enough. It has to be substantiated with evidence. and we have to be very clear what good looks like. Another thing that makes a good report is that it's written clearly so that an intelligent outsider could understand the content. And by that, we mean you don't need to be working in academia or in a specific field to really understand what the report's trying to say. The structure should be clear with plenty of signposting for the reader. The main signposting that we use in an evaluation report is the key evaluation questions. So we answer the questions of effectiveness, questions of impact, and questions of legacy and so forth separately. That's one form of signposting. There's other forms of signposting that people might use. It might be the strengths of the program, the weaknesses of the program, and so forth. But as long as that's clearly signposted. Another important thing is to avoid clutter and visuals, to present the visuals in a manner that makes the key results stand out. So you may have seen reports like this before as well, where you open the report, you start looking through, and there's just so much stuff in there. There's not a nice structure, and it's very hard to make sense of where the key results are. So the key results should be really presented up front, and they should be quite easy to find. Another important thing in a good report is that quotes are not overused. If you're using qualitative data, quotes are usually a form of that evidence against certain points that are being made, against certain findings, but they shouldn't be overused. You would have seen in the content that you've been through this week that we have a bit of a golden rule at Clear Horizon, that quotes don't comprise more than 30% of a report. They're very, very useful because they are they're people's voices, they're spoken in first person, and they're people's experiences of the program. So that's why they're so good, because they are directly from people's experiences, but they shouldn't be overused. Where they are used, the purpose should be really, really clear, and that is usually to illustrate a particular finding. And finally, the report structure. This is what we believe is a good report structure. Of course, what is a good report structure really depends on the person who's the audience for the report. They'll have their own definitions of a report structure. But we like to think of it as a pyramid, and the filtering of that, with at the beginning having a one-page outline of the key message or an infographic that actually says what the finding of the evaluation is. That could be followed by a more detailed 3-page executive summary. And I suppose the definition of a good executive summary is that it can stand alone. You can pull that out from the report and have it as a separate document, and it should tell the full story of the evaluation, but not in a lot of detail. But it should still tell the full story. It should briefly explain the purpose of the report, the evaluation, I'm sorry. It should say briefly what methodology was used to do the evaluation. It should clearly outline the findings, and it should finish with some recommendations normally. That can be followed by a more detailed, say, 25-page report. And again, in that language, it's clear and accessible. So that's the sort of filtering down from this high-level 1-page to a 3-page executive summary to a more substantial report. Of course, there's lots of examples of the body of reports being far more substantial than 25 pages. Sometimes that's expected, but really useful and used evaluation reports are quite short, and they're quite concise, and they help the commissioner make decisions that they need to make about the program that they're implementing. Okay, we're moving now to digital dashboards, and this is where Jen takes over. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Leanne. I have little children in the background, so I apologise if you can hear them making noise. We're in lockdown here in Melbourne, and yeah, they're home, and so am I. So digital dashboards. So Keisha, take us on to the next one. So Stephen Few wrote one of the first books on digital dashboards called Information Dashboard Design back in 2004, and is seen by many as sort of the grandfather of digital dashboards. And so his definition of it being a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives on a single screen is taken as sort of the definition of a dashboard. And I think this thing about achieving an objective is really, really critical, because they should answer a question for us. I see as evaluators, we're in the business of answering key evaluation questions. So the data should assist, maybe not be conclusive, but certainly assist in providing that information. Increasingly, they are being used in a lot of sectors to monitor the performance of projects, programs, teams. They don't replace an evaluation report. They're more of the measurement or the monitoring aspect that would then be incorporated into the evaluation. And the big distinction here between infographics, because I often get asked what the difference is between a dashboard and an infographic, is that infographics are generally static. They don't update. You can't slice and dice information. You can't use drill downs or drop down menus or turn a toggle on or off to look at different male versus female, or look at a map and drill into a location. Infographics are generally just what you see is what you get, whereas a dashboard is dynamic, real-time updates, and has this ability for users to self-serve and look at more data within the dashboard. So in terms of some examples, okay, should go over to the next page. Here is one we did a few years ago with the Children and Youth Area Partnership here in Victoria, close to us in Melbourne. And what you can see is that we've got everything on a page. So there were 7 key indicators that this partnership wanted to track for early years. And you can see, age 0, there's like this little pipe in the background that tells you that over between 0 and 5, there were these key indicators they wanted to monitor. So it took a lot of discussion to pick those 7 indicators, because originally there was about 40. And I think that happens in a lot of our monitoring and evaluation frameworks, is there's all these indicators. And I think one of the key things about a dashboard is it makes you display the most important to be monitored over time. It really makes people think about which ones really are going to be the best indicator of success or not in their program. This data was regularly updated. And then the 4th point there is that it can be easily understood by anyone with access to them. So the use of clear lines that pop out. You can see there's a trend line there, the yellow trend line that's been used. You can see where you can click on different locations within that particular geography. So there is, they've got to be very plain language. They have to be titled very well so that you understand what each visualization's about. And we've included a bit of information there about the background and where further information can be gathered. So those are the other sort of techniques that we've used in dashboards. Another example I'm going to show you. This is for the Young Farmers Business Program, which was funded in New South Wales, another part of Australia, where they wanted to improve the business skills of young farmers in drought-affected New South Wales. And they did it through a social media campaign, through coaching, and through a series of events. So we wanted to create a very simple dashboard that answered the questions. How have we engaged? So what's the program been doing? And you can see there it says events, coaching sessions, social media activities. And then we did an aggregate, and that very large number in the bottom left-hand corner was an aggregate of social media, workshops, coaching, and other things that went on at conferences, where they really tried to capture the volume of people engaged in that project. And these were connected to a lot of different data sources. So we had an event log, a coaching log. It connected to social media such as Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. So it connected to a lot of different data sets, but simply showed that data under those icons. Then in the middle, we had a nice map that people could look at to see where the events were being held and who was attending and how far they were traveling. And finally, the most important thing for us, you know, what is changing. And so we were able to link some of the surveys about the outcomes of the program, which was about a connection with others, increasing skills, accessing new products and services, and changing their belief in their capability, their capacity to make good business decisions. So we could see that, you know, we were getting good outcomes in terms of shifts in those outcomes. So this was a very simple, high level, and it sits on their website, which is lovely. So when people come to learn about the program, it shows the people looking at it what they've been doing and what results they're achieving. I like this one because it has 3 clear panels, and I think it's a lovely way, the rule of 3, to sort of show information in 3 clear panels. I quite like that one, and the framing of the key question. So it's one of my favorites, this one.
Can I make a comment on that, Jen?
Yes.
Yeah, this whole point of the logical sequence and thinking about program logic is if you move from left to right, you're saying, how have we engaged? Where are things happening? And then what's changing? So you're talking about what's being done, with whom and how, and then what changed as a result. So there's a logic there as well from terms of the program logic. So we expected changes in terms of connections and business skills and access and so forth as a result of the engagement with whom and the way it was engaged. So there's a bit of a sort of like a sideways program logic almost.
Absolutely. And I think what's interesting with dashboard design is that in Western countries, we read left to right. And in fact, they say that it's more like a Z as well. So you go across the page and then down and across the page. But it could be different depending on cultural background and how people read in countries. And so I think this is very much a white Western dashboard, and you know, we've gone that way, but it may be more appropriate to organize your data and your visualizations in a different way depending on what is best practice communication in your own you know, cultural setting. So that's just something to consider there. But yes, it tells a story, and I think that's what dashboards should do at a glance, is achieve that objective of telling a story. This is another one that looks at family support services. It's an example dashboard that we mocked up, but it was quite nice because you can see there you can look at individual centres, and Keisha's just selecting some of the drop down. We've got a date splitter, which is quite nice. Sometimes you just want to report on 6-month periods or a 12-month period. So the date splitter in the top left-hand corner help you select a particular date range to report on, and then you can take a snapshot and hand that in. Or if you're working as part of a service, you're not interested in everybody or all the other locations of the service, and you might say, I'm centre 4 and I just want to look at the results for me. So, or if you're the program manager, you might want to look at the whole. So it enables you to use the drop downs to select into the data. And the other thing here is the tooltips. I don't know if we can show you an example of a tooltip. Keisha, if you go over that.
So I'm actually not controlling it. It's the actual, I think it's a recording of.
It's a recording. Wow,
yeah.
Look at that. How clever is it?
There we go.
Is it going to show us a tooltip? Oh, look, there's a tooltip. So if you hover over certain aspects of it, it does show you some information, and I'm hoping it's going to go right now. Quick, everyone look. It says for more information, go here. But there are these ways that you can create little tooltips, little pop-up bubbles that gives you a little bit more information about the graph. So there's an example of a dynamic dashboard and some of the features on it. Again, we've used that sort of tiles, keeping it quite simple, reading left to right. So in terms of just summarising the key characteristics of a dashboard, is that it should be on a single page. You shouldn't have to scroll up and down the page. You should just be able to see it on a single page. It's got to show that most important information. And I often use the example of driving a car, you know, and we've all got dashboards on our car. And, you know, you really want to know about the petrol on your car or the gas meter. That's kind of really, really important because you want to know if you're going to run out of petrol. Other things such as, you know, the temperature outside or what music's playing, that's kind of nice to know, but I think it's about, you know, what's the petrol gauge for you? How do you, you know, what's going to tell you if you're on track or, you know, you're heading into trouble. Regular updates. I mean, dashboards can get very boring if they're not updated with new information. Easy comprehension, so they can be understood and they don't need an instruction manual to go with them. They're intuitive. They're you know, they make sense to the reader. The other piece that I hope you've picked up on some of the examples is grouping of similar data together and framing it with the questions. Putting it in a logical sequence, which is what Leanne picked up earlier. Using the drill down functions where appropriate and applicable, and using those little tooltips that hover above, which can provide a little bit more information if you'd like to provide that to your audience. So there's a summary of some of the key characteristics of a dashboard. I think we're going to have a few, sort of the chance for you to ask some questions in a moment.
Thanks both. Thanks, Jen. Thanks, Leanne, for your presentation. And I hope a lot of that resonated with you with the content online this week, or kind of affirmed some of the ideas that were discussed as well. So I have some questions. I've noticed that there, Maribel, thank you for popping your reflection into the chat. But feel free to post any questions or more reflections into the chat as we do go. We have half an hour left of this session, so really encouraging you to be able to ask as many questions as you would like. So my first question for the both of you, actually, I'm not sure who would like to start here, but just wondering, just in terms of MEL and MEL reporting, what is the best MEL report you have seen and why was it the best MEL report? Who would like to go first?
I'm happy to go. Yeah, it was, for me, it was an evaluation of the City of Melbourne's financial budgeting, which sounds quite boring, but what they did is they engaged the community in designing their first ever 10-year financial plan. So the community actually got to say how the government, the local government, was going to spend its budget. And they had a very powerful citizens' jury process for that. But what was great about the report is that in a one-page A3 infographic, it captured the key mechanisms they used to engage the citizens of Melbourne in that process. So from, you know, pop-up events in the street right through to a more formal citizens jury panel, and the time frame over that where it happened, how many people they reached. So there's some real facts and figures about the reach and the engagement, a bit like the Young Farmers Business Program engagement data. There was also some information on that one pager about the actual evaluation methodology. So how many people were interviewed and what sort of process the evaluation used. Then it talked about some of those results in terms of reach, how many times the citizens jury met, the kinds of decisions they came with and so forth. But then it talked about the extent to which the process was good, right? And so how do you judge good engagement? We use the values from the International Association for Public Participation, and we actually made a judgment around how good the process was against those 7 values. So we made a statement, and each statement was illustrated with 1 or 2 quotes from the interviews that showed that value in action. And then there was a judgment at the end about how good the process was overall and the extent to which the process had actually influenced the financial plan for the city. So all of that information was in one page. It was colourful, it was easy to read, and there was a flow. So it was, yeah, I still think it's about 5 or 6 years ago now. I still haven't seen, from my area of work, anything that comes close to that. I'm sure there is plenty of examples, but that's certainly mine.
One of my favourites was the Engineers Without Borders did a failure report back in 2011, and I really liked them coming out and talking about what hadn't worked. And I think that was one thing that was in your list, Leanne, of what is a good report, is something that actually does talk about what isn't working and what we're learning and how we're going to improve. I think reading an evaluation report, that's all good news stories, and I mean, it's great if that's the case, but I think people do want to learn from evaluation, and I think it's really, I love that report because it was bold and it was courageous. And I did an evaluation report on an organisation I worked on, and we called it Our Journey So Far, and brought in that idea of talking about what worked, but also talking about what we could have done better. And so I think that that one, I'll put the link in there. I really liked it. It was called the failure report. I don't know if you're that bold to actually come out with that line, but it certainly got everybody, I think, in the sector thinking about how we talk about. I'll put the link in there. That we've got to talk about what doesn't work.
Thank you. Yeah, that definitely makes sense. Yeah, it's not always good news stories, or even, elements. There might be some things that are good, but some things that aren't so good as well. So definitely keen to report on those. My next question for both of you, and Jen, I might actually start with you on this one. What are some of the common errors that you do see in visualizing results of MEL? Generally, I guess, in reports.
I've got 3 biggies I want to share. The first is clutter, is overfilling your data visualization. Too many colors, too many lines, too many words, too many visualizations. We try and actually fit to about 5 to 6 visualizations. You get over that and you get cognitive overload, and people cannot process the information that's going in. So don't overwhelm. Less is more. So that's my first key takeaway. The second one is not linking the data back to your monitoring and evaluation. There are lots and lots of interesting data out there, but if it doesn't link back to your monitoring and your evaluation, and you can't clearly draw a line back to what it relates to in your monitoring, evaluation and your program, that's a missed opportunity. You've really got to bring it back to your program. And the other one, which is really interesting, is where people can say that something is significant. And I think we make this mistake in reports. We can make this mistake, is saying that something is significant or marking something as significant when there's not been a statistical analysis or a test on that data to actually see if it's statistically significant or whether it just happened by chance. So I think there's a real danger in that, when we put on trend lines or we put on little ticks or smiley faces or, or traffic lights get used a lot in data visualizations, is being very wary about, if you're saying something is changing, is it really changing? Have you done the statistical analysis to back up that claim? So I think there's some of the errors I've seen in visualization.
Thank you. Leanne, any errors that you have seen?
Oh, and I think Jen's covered quite a few, and I'm mindful we should let others ask questions, so I'll leave it there. Thanks, Keisha.
Great, thank you. All right, well, I might switch to some of these questions here then. So Ali asks, dashboards are good, but often, it's big institutions that use it. Is the platform to build dashboards expensive to use?
We use Microsoft Power BI, and Microsoft offers some very good deals for academia and not-for-profits and other organisations. You would need to look at your eligibility, but my understanding is that if you are a not-for-profit or an academic institution, you can access quite cheap pricing for Microsoft's Power BI. It's actually free to download Microsoft's Power BI desktop version, but if you want to start sharing data with your colleagues confidentially, you need to have a license, a Power BI license. There are other ones out there. There's Tableau and Yellowfin are other dashboards. They have costing models as well. There are some free ones. I would be very weary of free because you'll get certain features for free, and then all of a sudden, if you want to start using features like sharing data, you have to pay a per cost per user per month, and they very quickly add up. It's a bit like playing, you know, a game on my phone. All of a sudden I have a big bill. So be wary of the free, because they often do have a sting in them, and also you need to check where the data is being held. So the Microsoft one, I think we pay a license of about 10 US a month per user, so that's about 120 US a year. But as I said, that's full cost. And I understand there can be 70% off for not-for-profits or others. So it might be worth looking into that.
Great. Thank you. And another question from Fortino. Dashboards are awesome, and you mentioned it doesn't replace an evaluation report. So can you create or generate a summary of the collated information through dashboards to be pasted into a MEL report? Like, how does that work in terms of for MEL reporting?
Absolutely. So I think the way that you'd always use a graph or a line chart or any other sort of visualization in an evaluation report, I mean, we'd often sort of cut and paste them out of Excel. You could do the same with a Power BI. You could, you know, screenshot it, or you can export. There's an export function to PowerPoint. You can export Power BI to a PowerPoint and use the visualizations that way. I think the best bet is use it as a monitoring tool. Do your monitoring reports, and then capture some screenshots, much the same as you would for quotes. It's there to back up your findings. It's there to provide, to illustrate, to bring, you know, to bring in that point, because evaluation reports have a degree of analysis and assessment and judgment. There's no assessment or judgment in a dashboard. It's just data. It takes a human being at this stage. That might change, but at the moment we still need human beings to make a judgment of, well, you know, is this good enough, or did this, you know, to what extent did this outcome change in the context we're in, which is what Leanne talked about earlier. I don't know if Leanne wants to add anything to that.
All good, Jen. Thank you.
I have another question here for you, Jen, as well. Just in terms of trends that you're seeing, like beyond dashboards, you know, what are different trends that you're seeing in relation to reporting of MEL data or visualization of data?
I was going to talk about flying cars then. In terms of trends, I'm seeing qualitative data, so, you know, words and stories being used more and more in data analysis. So people using natural language processing tools to model what people are talking about. So taking a load of text from an interview and then saying, well, the 3 topics discussed here were, you know, well-being of their children, family relationships, and education. And so being able to crunch a large amount of data and put that into sort of topics or you know, themes emerging from data. So that's interesting in terms of qualitative data. We're also seeing the use of sensors, so temperature gauges, water level sensors, sensors that are out, and this is important for you in agriculture, like sensors that are put out in space that is collecting real-time data and sending it back. So, we're using them in shopping centres to see a number of people through the doors, or as I said, the temperature in a certain space, or water, or some of those other sort of pieces of information that you need to track. The other thing is satellite imagery. There's banks and banks of data being made available publicly, and we're working on a project in Africa at the moment where, using satellite imagery, we are able to see deforestation trends or human rights abuses because people's houses are being burnt down. So we're now using other types of data in monitoring and evaluation that we're not collecting, but rather we're accessing the source in these sort of big data sources. So, social media I've talked about how we've used that, but there are these other things, such through sensors, satellites, or the Internet of Things. How often people are checking their phones or accessing their fridges or turning their lights on and things like that. So that's, how do we use big data? I think it's a really interesting one. And I think one of the big trends is that we're using more and more quant, and I think one of the trends we need to sort of pull back on is to keep the humans in the middle of our data. And there's many of you might have heard the story, the statement, no stories without data, no data without stories. And I think it's really important because there is a trend towards, just numbers and numbers and numbers and, getting everything on a page and, reducing the human experience. And we need to be careful not to do that. I think that's something that I'm keen is. I love dashboards and I love data, but we need both.
Great. And I think just a comment in the chat from Maribel is just saying, after a project, converting the results into IEC materials or infographics as well. Another way to show that reporting. Great. Leanne, is there anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was just picking up on what Jen said about the use of big data. So I think typically in program evaluation, people know that there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the external environment, the context that they need to keep an eye on to understand whether the problem they're working on is getting worse anyway, irrespective of their program, and as a result of other external factors. And so big tracking and capturing and using big data and actually being able to keep an eye on these broader contextual factors as part of keeping an ongoing eye on the nature of the problem you're trying to address through your program, and also the data that helps you make a stronger case for the contribution of your program to the resolution of problems is what you're talking about, Jen, that idea of being able to, wouldn't it be great if we could keep an eye on these context indicators or trend indicators that are an important part of the broader story of our program, but are not necessarily indicators of the success of our program in and of themselves. The ability to do that now is really, really changed.
My last question for you is actually for Leanne. Just in terms of balanced reporting, so what are the challenges around balanced reporting, and do you have any tips for telling that not so good story along with the good story?
Yeah, I mean, it's really just coming back to what we've said before. Too much in data without stories, and and numbers without stories, and stories without numbers being a real problem. I think people are familiar with writing a lot of descriptive information in a report, but not getting to the why or the so what. So not saying, here's all the data and this is what it means, this is what it's telling us, so that not that interpreting the next step of the so what do these results mean in this particular context. So a lot of going back to that first trap that we talked about, providing a lot of information, but you've got to work it out yourself, whether it's good or bad, whether the program has been good or bad. the obvious one, as you mentioned, talking a lot about what was achieved, but not talking about what hasn't been achieved or what hasn't been done well. So, you know, preventing people from being able to learn, which is the big thing, right? So we all start programs with the best of intentions and hope that certain things don't change too much, and that we can get on with our program and do what it, you know, achieve what we intend to achieve. And of course, all sorts of things happen that are not in any way reflective of the design or any way reflective of the effort of the people who are implementing it on the ground. They're just simply factors often outside of the control, but acknowledging them and being able to describe the achievements within that context, but also acknowledging what might have been done to make the program more effective, which is so important. And Jen's shared example of the failure report is a great one for that. Yeah, and then I guess the other one would be, yeah, go on that theme of the combination of qual and quant information, which is so important, and they work so well together. Being able to bring those together is what doesn't look good is an overuse of qual data to the extent that you're co-opting the quotes for the findings. So instead of using quotes to illustrate findings, you're actually using the quotes to be the findings, and that's not appropriate. And that's a common error that I see.
Great, thanks, Leanne. We've got just over 10 minutes to go. Does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask Leanne or Jen when it comes to visualization or reporting, or talking about from your own experiences of reporting for MEL or for research projects as well? Feel free to unmute yourselves if you don't feel comfortable typing in the chat, but happy to have more of an open conversation now. And Maribel's just popped in the chat, instances after a project implementation and report submission to the intended agency or beneficiaries, they will not act on the recommendations. Maybe they're too busy or it's not their priority or lack of resources.
Very common.
Yeah, I was talking to someone today about, you know, you can take a horse to water, but you can't make the horse actually drink the water in terms of recommendations. Right.
But there are things we can do to minimise the chances of this happening. And I guess the first one is to get really, really clear what information will actually help these people who are receiving the report, what information would actually help them make decisions they need to make. So if the report is very much targeted around answering some of the important decisions they need to, or providing the information to help make some of these important decisions that need to be made at this point in time, i.e. connecting the commissioner of the report's needs to what you're providing, is going to be the best example. So you might be providing recommendations around certain things that they are not in a position to or want to make decisions about right now. So really understanding the decisions that they are wanting to make and making sure that your report is speaking to those decisions is a way of minimising the chances this might happen. I can see Ali's got a question now, so I'll be quiet now.
No worries. Ali, did you actually want to unmute and elaborate on your question a little bit there? If you're able to. I might read it out in the meantime, just in case you're unable to.
Hello.
Oh, hi, there we go.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about, you know, the results from dashboards. I can see in big reports they are highlighting key issues. But so my question is this really to work for the details as well, or how does it work actually? In my view, just put the main ones from the dashboard or from our report or whatever is found, but then go details using your own data. Is that how it works? if I may clear.
Sorry, I lost a bit of that. What was the? You're on mute.
You know, the
sorry, Ali.
okay.
I think the
Yeah,
point
I'm
Ali's
saying that.
making. Oh, sorry, Ali. I'll let you speak.
Yeah, it's okay. So if I'm going to use, results from dashboards, am I going to be focused only on the key issues, and then the details I substantiate with my own data? Or how does it work actually? If you put everything from the dashboard, people may not believe, even never heard of it. So how actually it works in practice?
So if take something you're monitoring, an example of monitoring the number of people that are attending your service or the number of people that are using your research, or something else that you're monitoring, Ali, in your project. Can you give me an example?
It's often what proportion of farmers are food insecure,
Right,
or
okay.
stunted, things like that. Yeah.
So if your program was to improve access to, I don't know, particular access to a particular crop or something. I'm trying to think of an example here. You could be monitoring the price of a particular seed or something, or access to that particular crop in the market. If you're monitoring that, and then when you come to do your evaluation, and your key evaluation question, is something about to what extent were people able to access a variety of seed or product, you could look at the dashboard and you could see the trend for the year and then sort of take a snapshot and say, well, we noticed that it got very expensive around I don't know, the winter time or during this the wet season. I think it's there that it's there to back up your evaluation question. Much as I said, much like the quote, it's how you use your monitoring data is to help you tell or answer that question. Leanne might be able to help me out more here because I think she's more familiar with the agriculture space than me. Seem to have lost her.
At the end of the day, Ali's saying, look at the dashboards, just picking up on some key things and
Absolutely,
not all the detail.
No,
and I
no.
think
And they can't tell the story about why. Sorry, Leanne, but if there is a dip in the data, you're going to know why in July there was a dip. The dashboard can't tell you that. You go, oh, that's because there was a drought, or there was the oil prices crashed. You're going to have that data from your stakeholders.
Yeah, yep, that's right. So that doesn't do the sense making. But I think we have to remember the way we're suggesting dashboards be used for MEL. And you could have a dashboard that just tracks those big contextual indicators, like trends in rainfall or whatever. But if we think about it from a MEL perspective, like actually looking at program performance, those high level, and you're calling them key issues, Ali, we'd say they're the key measures that you want to track. So key performance indicators, if you like, that you want to keep an eye on, that help you understand that your program is on track to achieving the change it wants to see. So in the early days, your dashboard might be showing activity data, right? Numbers of events, rates of participation, and things like that. But over time, your dash should be able to pick up on some of the measures, important measures at the intermediate outcomes level, and actually show that you're starting to create change. So I would say, rather than maybe being concise to key issues, it's being concise to the most important measures that you believe should be tracked and looked at to understand the extent to which your program is actually on track to achieving what it wants to achieve.
Yeah.
And underneath a whole lot of detail.
So then on that as well, I guess, just picking up on that, there's a lot of kind of pre-work required in developing something like a dashboard, trying to figure out what those key indicators or key measures would be before even implementing a program in some instances, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Right. And think about the work that we've just gone through in this training, the work that's required to really identify good measures, like thinking about your theory of change, working out what's a priority to measure. Then you're in a position to start thinking about what your dashboard might look like and which of those key measures you need to display or want to display on your dashboard, given the purpose of the dashboard. Good topic. Thanks for bringing it up, Ali.
Thank you. Well, I think that might be all we have time for questions today. If there are any burning questions that you would like to ask Leanne or Jen, please pop them into the discussion board. If I can't answer them, I'll make sure that they are answered by Jen or Leanne as well. So just next week, just wanting to let you know that we will be talking more about learning and the different cycles, the different loops of learning next week. And we will also use some of the opportunity in the session to talk about the assignment feedback. We're probably about halfway through the assignments at the moment in terms of providing feedback. So we wanted to make sure that all of the feedback would have been provided before we do have a chat about it. So there will be that opportunity there. So make sure you do read through that feedback and come with any questions that you might have about the assignment. But otherwise, I'll leave it there for today. Thank you, Leanne and Jen, for your presentation and your responses as well today. We really appreciate you talking through your experiences and your knowledge through your years of being in this space.
No worries. I just put the link to the Great Barrier Reef Foundation on there because that's a live one that's public that you can go and have a look at and have a play with. And put up the water quality one, but there are other ones.
And as you well understand, Jen, there was an awful lot of work, months and months and months of work of trying to understand, because of the public-facing nature of this dashboard, what should be the right measures to go on that dashboard. Yeah, months of discussions.
Yeah, but look at the outcome. Yeah, it's just you know, it's now driving decision making, which is what we want.
Right. Yeah.
Fabulous. All right, enjoy the rest of your week. Take care and see you next Wednesday.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.